Are we good to go? Can you guys hear me on this? All right. My name is Kent C. Dodds. I work for a company in Utah in the United States called Alianza. We're a voice over IP platform. I do the front end, so I understand very little about voice over IP, all the fundamentals. But how many here were at my Intro to AngularJS talk yesterday? Okay, so a pretty good amount. So those of you who were, you know what I'm about to do. I'd like everybody to stand up, please. So it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We're all kind of sluggish because of lunch. We're going to do air squats. So you do an air squat like this, put your hands out in front of you and go down and up. That's an air squat, okay? We're going to do 12. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. I like the smiles on your faces. 4, 5, 6. That's halfway. 7, 8, 9, don't give up on me now, 10, 11, okay, I can't do it, no, just kidding, 12, there we go, thank you. Thank you so much for participating. Oh, we could do it again. So I like to do that because it loosens me up a little bit. I am nervous. All of you guys are and gals are very smart, and so I'm a little bit intimidated, and especially here at a conference that's mostly focused on the back-end technologies. I'm excited that you took the opportunity to come and learn a little bit about front-end technologies. So who here is familiar with AngularJS and has maybe used it or heard of it? Okay, what about ReactJS? Okay, smaller number, that's what I was expecting. So for those of you who are not familiar with either of these technologies, you're just going to enjoy the ride and kind of see how things are working. Hopefully this is just a good comparison between the two to see how they operate a little differently. Something else that this presentation is, this is all a live coded demo, so you're going to see me make mistakes, hopefully not. But we'll go through basically rewriting a very small application from Angular into React, and so you'll kind of see their differences, and where Angular may fall over and React picks up, and where Angular might be easier and React is a little bit more complicated. And then finally, another really cool thing that we'll be working in is we have a preprocessor for our JavaScript in this project that was actually very easy to set up. It's called Webpack. I encourage you to look into that technology. But it allows us to write our code in ES6 style, which is the next version of the language of JavaScript, which is very exciting. So we'll see some interesting things here. How many here are very familiar with JavaScript, code in it regularly? Okay, great. So you'll see some things, if you haven't ever done ES6, you'll see some things you're like, what on earth? And I'll be like, yeah, this is so cool. So, yeah, ES6 is great. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let me show you the application as it stands today. So hopefully nobody here has like issues with flashing lights, because we've got some. But the idea is that we have this grid, and we can control the number of columns and rows of the grid. And all that is happening is every second, the grid is totally randomized to the values in the grid. And then based on the high number and the low number, it's calculated what should be red and what should be green. So high is green, low is red, and then like anywhere in between is white. And so this illustrates one area where Angular kind of falls over, and that is when you have a lot of things that are updating at the same time or regularly or very quickly. And so the problem is that when you bind something in Angular, you say, this DOM node is bound to this value. Angular will just think about that one DOM node for that binding, and since we have 40 by 40, it's thinking about a lot of different bindings, and it's not only doing the one value, it's also doing the CSS classes and the whole grid itself. And so if we look at this and scroll around a little bit, actually a better example is if I bring this down to 1 and 800, and I scroll down really quickly, you'll see there's a stop. And on a Mac this should be very smooth scrolling. but it stops. And the reason that it's stopping is because that's when that next second or the data has been recalculated, and Angular has to go through and update the DOM, and it updates every single cell individually. And so that touching the DOM is a very expensive experience. Whereas with React, if we go to the finished application example, React is a little bit quicker. Oh, let's see. And we need one row. And so this is nice and smooth. This is what we're going to be building. And the reason that React is quicker is instead of updating one node at a time, or even just like an attribute and the value of a node at a time, it's actually doing an advanced diff algorithm to determine what needs to be changed, and it will change the thing that needs to be most changed. And so in this example, it's basically saying, okay, so there's enough changing here that I'm just going to replace the whole thing. And so it does a single DOM operation instead of 800 or actually even more because you have the class names and the values. So like you have tons of DOM operations happening in here, whereas there's only one DOM operation here. So I'm not trying to persuade you to switch from Angular to React. My day job is in Angular. Lots of my side projects are in Angular and React. They're both very awesome technologies, but this is just demonstrating one use case that you might consider moving from Angular to React. So yeah, let's go ahead and just jump into the code. Let me turn off Twitter. You can tweet at me, by the way. I like tweets. So here we are with our application. I have Webpack running, and it's hosting our application locally and pre-processing all of our files using common.js modules. So we'll start at our index.js. Well, actually, always in a web app, you want to start at index.html. And so that's where we are here. And we have, if you're familiar with Angular, this will make sense to you. If you're not as much, become familiar with it, it's great. But we're specifying to Angular our application is right here, and it's named this. And if you are familiar with Angular, you'll be like, what? That is a weird name. But yeah, you can do that. And then with ng controller, and specifying, hey, this main controller guy is in charge of the scope of the body and all of its children. So then from here, we have a couple of directives that we're saying, hey, this value of grid values dot columns is bound to this input, and then the same for this for the rows input. And then we're using a directive here, the grid.odata, and yeah. So if we go to our grid.odata, then we have some styles that we're bringing in. We have our template, and this is just our ng repeat with our column headers and our ng repeat for our data. And this is a nested ng repeat because our data is a multidimensional array. So here we have dimension 1 and dimension 2, or let's see, 2 or 1. We got 2 dimensions. And then we're just assigning a class based on whether it's high and low, and that's calculated in our controller here. So should all be fairly simple. Does anybody have questions about how the application is all kind of put together before we start rewriting this? Okay, great. Want everybody to be able to follow along and understand what's going on. So if you've if you've ever migrated from one technology to another, you know that a total rewrite, especially if it's a sizable application, is not an option for the business or even for development. Often it's not an option. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to iterate on our rewrite. So we start with something that's small and contained, and then build it out into the entire application. And so, and one other thing that I wanted, well, this may not be all that interesting to you guys, but it's interesting to me. I wrote this this library called ngstats, and it allows you to look at an Angular application and kind of profile the watchers. If you're familiar with Angular, you'll know what I mean. So this is the watcher count. This is the number of things that Angular is keeping track of on this page. So 3,200 items. That's not small, but that's also not totally uncommon in larger applications. But what the real problem is right here, this number, that 200-ish, that's representing the number of milliseconds that it's taking for Angular to respond to the changes in the data. And that is awful. So it should be closer to like 16 milliseconds. That's how you reach the 60 frames per second that we're looking for in the front end. Otherwise, it looks really janky. So anyway, that is ng stats on that page. It's pretty terrible. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in to our application. Oh, and I wanted to also mention, for those of you not familiar with that Webpack, how many people have even heard of Webpack before? I wasn't expecting a lot of you to have heard of it. It's relatively new, but if you're a front-end developer, it is like heaven, and one day you will hear of it because it is that good. So yeah, Webpack is generating this bundle.js file for us and serving that up to our index.html. So we tell Webpack that the start of our application, so like you could almost think of this as the main method, is our index.js. So in here we're requiring Angular to get Angular onto the page, and then we're loading in some very simple styles. And then the ng helper is just a couple of scripts that I put on here to make things easier, like the show Angular stats thing. And then root. And this is like the actual meat of our application. So we create our Angular module here. It has 0 dependencies. And then we add a constant to make our code testable so that we can inject the underscore for Lodash. And then we add a value that will keep the state of our grid values across our application. And then we have our main controller that's controlling pretty much the entire application, setting the scope for that. And then we're requiring our grid data so that we have access to the grid data directive. So here we'll jump into, like I said, we want, when you're rewriting or migrating, you want to start with something as small as possible and isolated as possible. So we'll start with our directive. And so the way, like here's your first taste of ES6 right there. That's an arrow function. This is basically the same as this, for those of you who are curious. Same as this. So those are the same, except less typing, and you look kind of hipster doing it. So here we are specifying, this is our DDO for the grid data directive. It has a template, also has some styles. Pretty simple styles with the high and low being green and red. And then our template, as I showed before. And then we're specifying, hey, I have data that will be passed to me as the data. And then in here, we can utilize it in our controller on VM data. And so we're adding a watch on our scope to say, whenever VM data changes, I want to recalculate the high, the low, the column count, row count, and the column headers. And then it will re-render the rest of our stuff automatically for us because we're just using data. So if you're not totally lost by now, I have failed. I'm just kidding. Hopefully this all makes sense. And we're, so now we're going to actually jump in and start building React. Yes?
The reason you're including the style in the module instead of the view?
Yeah, good question. So if I were to, so this would be my view. This is my template. So there's actually, I guess that's an interesting idea. I've never actually done this, but I could technically probably do that. Basically with Webpack, I can just require in the CSS, or I could actually make this less or style or stylus or anything, and Webpack will load in the styles for me. So I can consider my directive and my view to basically, the directive is the view model and the view is the view, and so they are coupled implicitly, and so sticking the styles in here Is just, yeah, the way that I've done it. I've actually never tried to just stick it in the template. It'd be interesting. This is actually something that you can do with React and do it quite successfully. So, good question. Any other questions before we start doing React? Okay, great. So, with React, okay, so with Angular you have directives. With React, everything is components. So instead of controllers, you have components. Instead of directives, you have components. So we're going to make a components folder, and we'll make a data grid React component. And just to save myself some typing, I have a live template. It's rcomp, and that'll create the React component for me, or the shell for it. So I specify this as JSX. And who here knows what JSX means? Okay, not very many. So you guys might throw up in your mouth the first time you see this, but like give it 5 minutes of just like typing this out yourself, and you'll be like, "Wow, this is awesome." But yeah, we'll just let you throw it in your mouth really quick. So we're going to call this data grid, and you see I'm exporting the data grid down here, so that I can require it in later. So we'll just start out very simple. We'll make a div and say, "Hello world." Actually, JFocus. When I grow up, I want to be a data grid. Okay, so we'll just make it as simple as possible for now. And we'll go into our grid of data. And so now, our grid of data, we don't want to just totally blow it away. Like I said, we want to slowly start from the center and work our way out, like eating Angular from the inside. And so we're actually going to change from all of this bind to controller, all of this stuff. We'll just comment this out. And we're going to change to the link function. And if you don't know Angular, sorry, you can come to my training this weekend. But the link function takes the scope, the L, and the adders. We actually don't need the adders, so we'll just take the scope and the L. And then in here, we're going to render our React component onto the element of this directive. So the first thing that we need is to do this is React. So we're going to require React, and we also need our component as well. So we're going to get our data grid, and it's in our components directory. Okay. And so then in our link function, we're going to say react.render. And again, you can throw up in your mouth. We're putting JSX in right here. And we'll say L. And L in Angular is wrapped as almost kind of like a jQuery element. And so we're getting the first item out of that element, which will be the actual node. And so we're saying, React, I want you to render the data grid on this node. So does that line make sense? Okay, it's actually like quite intuitive, I think. So let's go ahead and save this and see if I broke stuff. Yes, I did break stuff, but it's actually showing us exactly what we want. So far, so good. And React actually is very good at showing you error messages or warnings in the console during development. And so if we'd done something wrong, then React would tell us here in the console. But so far, so good. So now we need to actually take this and turn it into a data grid because I want my data grid streams to come true. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's pass in the data to our data grid so that it can have access to that data. So we'll pass it in as data, and this is going to be a prop in React context. And in JSX, when you do a single curly brace, it's like saying, okay, all of a sudden this is just JavaScript. And so, and actually, if you are interested in JSX, it's actually, let me really quickly just show you what this would look like if it were just Java or JavaScript. So, well, yeah. So first you'd need to create a factory. So doing JSX will do this for you, but if we want to just do JavaScript, we say react.create factory, and we pass in data grid. And then this will give us our data grid instance. And so then we simply invoke the data grid instance with an object that is the props that we're giving our data grid. So to do the same thing, we'd say data is, and then we'd say scope.data. And down here we'll do the same. So those are equivalent, at least starting from here to here. That's the equivalent as above. You can see why I prefer JSX. Okay, so now we're passing the data to our data grid, so our data grid now needs to respond to this data. So for now, actually what we want to do is all these calculations that we did in our directive, we want to do those same calculations as in our React component. So we're going to just copy all of that into our render function and uncomment it and space it. And instead of VM, which is view model, we don't have a concept quite like that in React. So we'll change all of these to var declarations and take out that VM. And so now let's, just to make sure that we got our data and everything, oh, also we're going to specify our data is this.props.data. So that is coming from this right here. So if I said like awesome sauce, this over here would be awesome sauce. So that's how that maps. Okay, so now I have data, and before in my Griddo data, I took it in as new data, but now I'm just going to name it data for simplicity. So we'll change all of those to be data. Okay, so just to demonstrate that this is all working, we'll change this from that text to row count. So let's refresh, and row count is 40, and you'll notice that doesn't change automatically for us. So let's really quickly, we'll make that happen. So the way that we were doing this before was we had a watch around the data that was being passed in. We're actually going to do that, basically the same thing, except it's no longer going to be VM data because we're not using controller as syntax anymore. It'll just simply be data. So we'll say scope.watch data, and this will still call it the new data here. Oh man, I'm such an ES5 guy. Let me fix this real quick. That's better. Okay. And then instead of scope.data, we want the new data that was updated. So now, assuming this all works, oh, I blew something up. Scope's not defined. Oh, that's right. In the link function, I like to call it just regular scope so I know where I am. Okay, so then if I change the rows, oh, it's still not updating. And I think the reason for that is, I diverted from what I normally do, so I probably shouldn't have done that. Here, let's console log this. If this doesn't do what I think it will, then we'll just keep going. Yeah. Okay, we'll just keep going, and it'll work later. This is why you don't practice it like 3 times, and then during presentation do something different. So let's go ahead and now we actually want to build out our Griddo data as our data grid. And so we're going to take the original Griddo data template, and we're going to pull it into our data grid here. And so we'll just paste it in, and what we're looking at here is an Angular template. We need to change this to a React JSX component. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to rename the class to be the same as the name of our component, just for fun. And also in React, because this actually gets compiled down into JavaScript, you can't use class because class is reserved. So, which is really sort of kind of too bad. But we'll name this class name, and React will convert that into a class for us. And then instead of curly brace or double curly braces, all of our doubles will be singles, and we'll close those the same. And instead of VM, we no longer need that because we're just referencing vars, and I missed one right there. Okay, so still this isn't, yeah, it blows up because this isn't a React JSX component yet. We're still using Angular directives and stuff. So let's pull some of this stuff out. First I'm going to take out this comment, and for anything that is doing like a lot of logic or anything, You don't even want that in the render function. You'd put that as like instance methods, but we'll just stick it in the render function so that it is a little easier to grok. So instead of this, we're going to have a variable called columns, and so we'll create that here, var columns equals, and we'll just really quickly just make it a div that says I am columns, and then we'll put the comment of what there was before to help us in the future. And then instead of this that has an ng repeat on there, we're going to put this as rows. And I don't know why, but WebStorm keeps doing this to my tables, and I hate that. I'm sure I could fix it because WebStorm's amazing, but so then we'll just say make a div I am the rows, and we'll comment this out here so we can see that later. Okay, so everything's valid. We refresh the page, and here we say, hi, I'm a data grid. I have 40 columns and 40 rows, and I'm the columns, I'm the rows. Okay, so now we can actually start building out what those columns look like and those rows look like. So if I say, and because I'm using ES6, I don't have to worry about whether the browser supports this, because my preprocessor will handle this for me, which is sweet. So I can say column, and actually here, let's, we'll say column headers dot map, and this will take the header and the index, and we'll arrow function. Oh, and this is a thing of beauty. I can do this on a single line. Man, arrow functions. And so then I'm going to, there's an implicit return with the arrow functions if it's on a single line. And so I'm going to basically do the same. In fact, we'll just copy this. I'm going to do the same thing, except instead of an ng repeat, I get that for just basically for free with this map. But I do need to specify a key for anything that's a repeated item, just so that React knows how to track it. So I specify key with index, and then I say column and index +1, or actually header +1. Either or, because it's actually just a range from 0 to whatever the column count is. But okay, so that's our columns. Let's refresh and make sure we've got that. Yep, columns, so far so good. And now we need to build our rows. So we'll say data.map. So we'll map our data, and we have a row and an index for that row. And this one, unfortunately, can't do it on a single line because I need to do some extra stuff. So we'll say each row will have cells, and we'll say that is a div. I am a happy cell at JFocus. Woo! And then each row also has this a TD specifying its row number. So we'll say the return with the with that TD where the strong row index +1, and then it also has all of the cells. And actually, sorry, row is more than just TDs. It's also an actual row. Whoops, TR. Yeah, thanks, WebStorm. There we go. Whoops. Okay, so now we have our rows just returning a single TD, and our cells, which is just a div, which actually should not be a div because tables don't like divs. They like TDs. So I'll go back here. And now I'm a happy cell at JFocus. Look at all these happy cells. Yeah, and I'm a happy presenter at JFocus. Okay, so now, are you kind of following the logic? Like, you just take it a piece at a time, and as small a piece as possible. Because, I'll just step aside really quick. When you decide, okay, I'm going to rewrite this whole thing, and it's going to be awesome, and you start on this, and it takes like 2 weeks, and then your PM's like, hey, we've had a shift in priority, so you need to work on this now, and that lives in a branch forever, that never gets merged. Yeah, that was a waste of 2 weeks. That has happened to me, and it's really frustrating. So you take the smallest piece that you can at a time, even though you want to like rip all this stuff out, and whatever it is that you're migrating from. Yeah, backbone to Angular, that was me. So now we need to actually build out our cells, because they're not just happy cells, they're valued cells. So that data is contained in our row, because this data is a multidimensional array. And so now this row is an array, so we can map on that row. Okay, so we'll have the value and index for that item, and this one can be on a single line. Woo! And so this will just be this TD here. Actually, you know what? I don't think it can be on a single line. I don't think I did that. Okay, so instead of the ng repeat again. Oh, and actually, sorry, this needs to have a key. I'll bet that. Yeah, see, React is telling us, hey, each child needs to have a key, and there's a reason for it, and here's the link, and so need to watch that. So we'll give this a key index, and then in here we also need to specify a key for this one, and instead of class, it's going to be a class name. Okay, so we'll say key is index, and then we need to calculate our class name. So, whoops, oh, everything's like all kinds of broken. Okay, so actually let's just hold off on the class name really quick. We'll just let everything be white, and we'll just pass in the value for the actual value of the cell. So this at this point should be looking like this. And it is updating, just like magic. Thank you. So, I'm sorry. I don't know why it wasn't updating before. I obviously don't know how to program. But, okay, so now we're not quite at parity with what we had before, and you can't push in stuff that's like regressions, and all your coworkers laugh at you, and so embarrassing. So, I'm going to use let here just because I'm using ES6 and I can do what I want. And I'm going to say let the class name be equal to, and basically we're going to do this similar ternary operator. Well, we're going to turn this little object thing that we had before into a ternary operator. So we'll say if the value is greater than the high, then we're going to give this a class of high. Otherwise, if the value is less than the low, low, then we'll give this a class of low. Otherwise, we'll just do null. And we'll give that to our class, not class, but class name. Thank you, React, for being so quirky. And we'll add semicolons, because that's how I roll. And we'll take out this comment, because that's also how I roll. And now, it's still broken, and I'll explain why. We don't have our CSS in here. Well, at least it's not matching our component anymore. See, before it was matching this Griddo data, and our CSS is still on Griddo data, but our class is no longer Griddo data, it's data grid. And so we're going to copy this and paste it in here, and we're going to rename it just for convention to data grid. And we'll take all these Griddo data classes, and we'll say data grid. There we go. Now it should work. Cross your fingers. Ah, dang it. Okay, let's see what I'm doing wrong here. Oh, you're right. Okay. I also need to bring in this new CSS. So we're going to simply require datagrid.css. Okay, now it's going to work. If it doesn't, you can boo me off the stage. Okay. Thank you. I was really kind of nervous for a second. Like, they're really going to do it. Okay, so now we actually, like, this is a fully functioning component in React. And you can't read property length of undefined, go figure. So let's give it at least a row or a column, and we can take all the rows away that we want. So actually, I didn't show you this earlier, but I have these sweet extensions that will tell me when I'm running an app that's using Angular or React. I actually forked the Angular one and made the React one. And so we're actually running both now on a single page, which is great. It also is very heavy for the browser to download, but that's okay. Oh, did I? Oh, you're right. Ha, that's hilarious. I don't know how many times I've looked at this. So we can fix that real quick. I hope it doesn't throw off the rest of my presentation, but yeah, let's just do this. Rows. Columns. There we go. The model's the same, but I don't know what to do about that. Thank you. I'm going to leave it. We all know. So embarrassing. I have actually given this presentation to like probably 50 other developers. None of them caught that. So good on you. Great. Okay. Let's just clean out our slate here really quick. So does anybody have any questions before I move on and we're going to start eating Angular from React? Yes?
This is the Webpack that's now pre-processing the ES6 and then the JSX.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And actually, I found that out this morning that there's a... so let me just show you my Webpack config. This is so awesome. This is how big this config is. If you're familiar with front-end build tools, you cannot do this with Gulp. Or Grunt. This is amazing. So I'm using a loader called 6to5 for all of my JS files. In fact, I don't need this JSX madness anymore because of what I learned this morning. So 6to5 actually has built into it. 6to5's purpose is to take your ES6 code and convert it into readable ES5 code. So if I open up my source here and go, so this is my Webpack footer. Here, we'll open the data grid. Actually, this will be good anyway, so you guys see what the JSX compiles down to. So this is actually quite readable from the ES6 format to this 6to5. So actually, probably the Griddo data is a better example. So it converts that arrow function to a regular function, and it converts all of these arrow functions I had before to regular functions. I'm actually not really leveraging ES6 a lot right now, but I will in a little bit more. But then here we have our compiled JSX, and so you can see if we look back at our data grid, we have a div with a data grid and a table and a t-head. So we have our div, and it is giving us the props class name, and then it has as a sibling to that. So it's all these are children of each other, so they go in as kind of arguments to a function invocation. As a sibling to, or as a child to that rather, you have the name of that, and then as a sibling to that, you have the column count, and just all this beautiful stuff. It's great, but JSX is so much easier to write. So that's why I write that. But I've totally gone off track. Did I answer your question? Okay, good. Okay, so any other questions before we move on? Yeah.
Could we see the frame speed?
Oh, yeah. So I can show you show Angular stats, but now you see there's just 9 things that Angular is watching now because it's not watching all of these things, and everything inside this grid is just React, and I don't have React stats yet. I should probably build that or something. But it's still actually remarkably slow, and I can't tell you why. I don't know why Angular is still chugging along here. I know that it does slow down when I bring this down when I bring my columns on the rows down to 1. It does slow down, but I don't know why. I could look into that a little further, but good question. We could actually, let's do this now. We'll change this to 1 and this to 800. Oh, 8,000. Yeah, Angular would actually just throw up at that if we did that. But yeah, now it's much more smooth. Actually, let's get some applause for that. Thank you, React. So it is much more smooth, but you can sort of still notice a little bit of jankiness. And that's actually not entirely Angular's fault. If we look at this React by itself, you can sort of kind of barely notice a little jankiness. So this is this is a lot of data. We're displaying a lot of data, so it's going to be a little janky. And you would never show this much data to your users anyway. So this is very much a contrived example. I do only have about 10 minutes. I'm not sure if I can eat up the entire rest of the application in just 10 minutes. So I'm going to go as far as I can, and then I'm going to check out the last tag that I have, just so you can see the rest of it. Okay, so we'll be able to get rid of the directive. So let's go ahead and, we don't need these anymore, the CSS and the HTML, because that's all being handled by our React component at this point. I don't need that open anymore. And then I can go to my grid of data, and I certainly don't need the comments anymore. Don't ever commit comments. You've got git history, it's okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so delete comments, it's great. Don't come out stuff. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to actually take the data grid and use it in our main controller instead of using the griddo data directive. And so the way that we're going to accomplish this is, well, yeah, I do only have 10 minutes. So maybe I'm going to see how fast I can rewrite the whole main controller and just like rip out Angular altogether. So pray for me. Okay, so we're going to go into our main controller, and actually at the very top, we're going to make a var app, or actually, we'll just, thank you, live templates. And we'll call this app, and now we have 2 exports, and we're not going to like that very much, so we'll just, I don't know, heck, we'll comment that out. But we'll remove it before we commit. And then we're going to take our template from the index.html, and we'll copy it, everything inside of the body, everything that the main controller had scope over, and we'll put it into here. And this is going to explode on us, and if you've done React before, you know why, but you can't have, you can only have one root DOM node in a React component. So we're going to say div, and wrap everything inside this div. Okay, that's better. Pro tip. So now this is still like an Angular template. First of all, we've got heart Angular, but now we're stabbing Angular in the back, so we're going to get rid of Angular. And we also have ng model. So React has a totally different concept on how it does data binding. It really doesn't do data binding at all. It does unidirectional data flow. So it flows from the top on down, and then components maintain their own state. Or they're really just like state machines. And so instead of ng model that binds back and forth, we're going to use value, and it's going to take grid values.columns, and we'll do the same for rows. Value is the grid value rows, and so we need to have grid values somewhere. So we're going to specify our get initial state function. Not in the render function. And if you're interested in the React component lifecycle, React has great documentation. So we're going to say our grid, actually here we'll just go to our index.html here, and we'll copy this. So we're going to take out our grid values from here now, and we're going to stick it right as our state for this component. So grid values. And then we also are, this component is also going to store its own state for data. And so as part of all of this, we're going to take this data function, or rather the get data function, and we're going to rip it out up here. And it's going to be a stateless function, so we don't need to have it in the component because it's just. And here comes ES6. I love this. So we're going to do destructuring argument assignment. So columns and rows. Man, that is so cool to me. So we'll just do columns and rows instead of getting it right off the grid values. And then as part of our get initial state, we'll say grid values. Another piece of ES6 right there. In ES5, I'd have to say grid values. And that's like crazy redundant. I don't need to do that anymore. And data, and we'll say get data with the grid values. And so like this is so legit because I'm passing in an object and then it's destructuring it, and it doesn't that's so cool. So there we have our get initial state, and so now inside of our render function we can say this dot state dot data is equal to, or sorry, rather var data is equal to all of that, and var columns, this state dot grid values. Oh, actually, I think I'm just using grid values, so I don't need columns grid values. Okay, so now those grid values should have their values, and then instead of the grid data, I'm going to require my data grid components data grid. And we're going to destroy that and say data grid. And the data is just our data that we have on in scope of this function. Okay, I think that should. Oh, and sorry, one other thing that we need to do. So we've created this this app class, but now we actually need to use it in our application. And so the way to do that is, first off, we don't need any of this Angular stuff in our index anymore. And so now we just have the body. And then in our index HTML, we don't need Angular anymore. We don't need ng helper. And then in our root, we don't need any of this stuff. All we're going to do is say require React. And then we're going to also require our app. And that's in our, let's see, app? No. Where is that? Oh, it's in our main controller. Yeah, that's weird. We'll rename that file later. And then we'll say react.render the app, and we don't have any props to give it, and we'll render it on the document.body. Okay, that was a lot of coding, so let's see if this breaks. Yeah, I thought it might. So, oh, underscore is not defined, so where are we using underscore? Oh, yeah, okay. So require underscore is low dash. Oh man, that worked. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so React is giving us a very timely warning. You provided a value prop. Here, let's make it so you can all read. You provide a value prop to a form field without an onChange. This is basically saying, hey, you're just giving this form field a value, but like we're not going to respond to any like change events. And so like basically the user is like, why can't I do anything with this? So it's no better than a div. So we need to add an onChange listener to this piece. So, and there are actually a couple other things that we need to do as well, because it's also not updating every second anymore. So yeah, we've got 3 minutes to get parity. You know what? There is a coffee break after this, so raise your hand if you're okay with me taking like 2 or 3 more minutes. Like, okay. For those of you who are not okay, that's fine. You can leave. It won't offend me. But I hate you. No, just kidding. So okay. So what we're going to do from here is let's first wire up the well, let's see. Probably be better to wire up the updating of the data and updating our state based on these columns and rows, which are actually like rows and columns. I'll fix that later because we got to reach parity, right? So I can't like fix it, and that would break it, and whatever. Okay, so we'll say onChange. And again, I'm breaking into JavaScript here when I do the curly braces. And so I'm going to create an instance method for this React class that is this.update state based on values. Yeah, thank you, minification. So we'll create that function. And then in React land, the only way that I have access to this input is if I provide it with a ref. So that's just an attribute. So I give it a ref of this one's going to be columns, and we'll do the same for this. So there's not an easy way to copy paste that. Actually, well, yeah, there is. Watch this. Oh, dang it. Okay, never mind. That would have been cool, but it wasn't. Okay, so now these will both update. Well, they will at least invoke this every time something is changed. Okay, so now that I have this refs, or these refs, and row and columns, rows, I can get the values of those input fields whenever something changes. So the way I do this is I say var columns. Oh, there's the clappage. Oh, man. So we'll say this.refs. So by specifying a ref, it creates a refs object for my instance, and I can get the columns, and then I say get DOM node. And then from here, it's just regular DOM node, and so I can get the value. And I do the same for the rows. Rows. And then I need to reset the state for my component. So I say var data equals get data with, actually here, let's first create our grid values. Grid values equals, columns and rows. Thank you, ES6. And then grid values. And then we say this.set state with data and grid values. And so what this is doing, this .setState is common for all components, and this is just saying, hey, my state has changed, I want you to re-render me. And so then it'll go through and recall the render function, and it'll call the render function for all of its children, and boom, you have this awesome thing. It'll then recalculate the diff and find out what needs to be updated in the DOM, and then perform as few DOM operations as possible to update what needs to be updated. So I'm pretty sure we should at least be getting the columns and rows changing. Yeah. There we go. Oh, and that again is rows. That's so embarrassing. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, great. So now we just have one more thing, and that is to make it update every second, like we were before. And actually, we're going to make it update every 500 milliseconds because React enables us to do things like lightning fast. And so that's fun. So we'll say this is another lifecycle method. So a component will mount. So when the component is rendered, then we'll start the set interval. So, and we'll just invoke the update state based on values. And this will be every 500 milliseconds. And if I didn't do something wrong, yes! And now if we compare this, again, we'll take this down to 1, or how about 2 and 800. So this has twice as much stuff. And it's still a little bit janky, because that is a lot of data, but you can't fault it. That's awesome. And I mean, how many of you guys are actually going to build something that is like this, and you're showing this much data to your users? Maybe some of you, but this isn't like super crazy common that you'd actually be doing this. But I just wanted to demonstrate that there are some things about Angular that are way awesome and way cool, and also that are quirks and weird, and then there's the performance issues with stuff like this. But then with React, like it can fix many of those performance issues because it has a totally different concept of how to do things. So hopefully this was helpful to you. I'm totally happy to answer any of your questions, and I'll see you around the conference. Thank you.